Some of the historical events in this video have been dramatized for the sake of the script. What's hilarious is that most of this shit actually happened, so please enjoy. Imagine this. It's 2012 and you're a game dev who works for a tiny studio called Telltale Games. Before your arrival, the studio's biggest claim to fame was the Wallace and Gromit video game, but the company suddenly skyrocketed in prestige as a result of a little passion project that you helped create called The Walking Dead Season 1. This game that you helped create received a massive critical acclaim, and not only took players on an intense emotional journey, but also challenged how the entire world would come to understand the narrative potential of video games. Not bad for your first gig. So now, imagine this. It's late 2012 and you're sitting at your cozy little desk, and your boss approaches you and tells you, "Hey Jimbo, great job on that last game you made. It made us lots of money, so would you mind making us another one?" So you, being the polite fellow that you are, reply, "Well, that sounds cool, but that's definitely a lot of pressure on us since the first game was so revolutionary. Plus, the story pretty much had the perfect ending already, so it doesn't exactly seem like that's the best idea." Your boss then leans into your ear and goes, "Well, if you don't want to work on it again, we'll just give your baby to someone else." So you crack your knuckles and get to work. You ponder on your current situation. You've got the continuously evolving world of The Walking Dead to work with, having both the TV shows and the comic books to draw inspiration from, as well as your old team of writers and creative directors. "Oh, sorry, Jimbo. We've gotten rid of the two biggest creative leads on the team. So, yeah, they're gone." Wait, what? Why? What? You got, why? Well, we didn't give them any credit at any of the Game Award ceremonies when the game that they made won, like, every Game of the Year award, so they decided to bugger off and make their own independent game studio. My father never loved me. So now you tell yourself, "Okay, Jim, don't panic, you can still do this." After all, you know that you've still got a budget increase for this game, which will make this whole process a lot easier than it was the first time. In terms of budget, you know that you're competing with AAA publishers that sometimes hire hundreds of employees and spend upwards of up to tens of $millions on a narrative-driven game. Telltale was already having money problems during the first game's development, and the studio has less than 100 staff members at the moment, so it's great to know that you'll have a bigger team to work on Season 2, given that— By the way, Jimbo, we spent all that extra money to buy the rights to Batman and Game of Thrones, which we'll be making at the same time as Season 2 of The Walking Dead."
Walk out the door, you see someone that you know, and they ask you how you are, and you just have to say that you're fine when you're not really fine, but you just can't get into it because they would never understand.
To say that Telltale Games was mismanaged would be the understatement of the decade, and you could see glimmers of the company's downfall even as far back as 2013. That said, the ace team behind The Walking Dead Season 2, despite all of this nonsense, not only managed to surpass all expectations of what the game would come to be, but they somehow managed to make a game that was even better than its predecessor. Here's the story of how they did it. Step 1. Assemble a team. Okay, so you still have a decent enough chunk of the creative directors from the last game, including Dennis Lenhart and Eric Parsons, and you've still got some of the lead designers and artists on board, including Mark Darren and Derek Sakai. Mark also even wrote some of the first season of the game, so that's a good start. So it's not like we're a completely fresh new team, but there's no question that our writing staff has been hardcore gutted. So first things first, who do we get on board as the new writers? Well, what's the best written game of all time? Okay, we definitely can't afford any of those guys, but what's the second most well-written game of all time? Excellent. Cue Nick Brecton. Okay, this guy looks like he's got a whole bunch of things he's done. Let's very politely and formally ask him if he's interested. Turns out he's interested. Okay, let's also get Pierre Charette a shot at writing some of this stuff. He's only had some minor roles in writing the Season 1 script, but he knows the team. Has he done anything else? No, but damn it, he's the best we've got. So now Nick Brecton is basically tasked with leading a hodgepodge team of misfits to create a sequel to the most critically revered narrative-based video game of all time. No pressure, man. Step 2. Theming. Okay, so since Lee isn't a thing anymore and Clementine is pretty much the only interesting character who's still alive from the last game, we'll want to focus things on her. So now that we have that in mind, what's the story that we can tell that is simultaneously capable of tying in the elements from the last game while also tackling new subjects that challenge the player? Well, let's take a look at the ending of Season 1. Sorry to break the fourth wall here, but a little thing I left out in the first video in this series, which you should totally check out by the way, is the final scene in which Clementine is left to look out into the distance, where she sees some encroaching figures. At first, Clementine is happy, as she finally has some people that she can meet up with to keep her safe. But then her expression changes. The images don't become any clearer, but the camera lingers on them, beckoning the player to contemplate the myriad different horrors that these figures can represent for Clementine. Could they be walkers? That would be terrible. But could they also be something worse? Far worse? Could they be human beings? The kind that you met on the farm? The kind that are just hoping to come across a defenseless little girl? So, okay, says Nick. Let's have this final image operate as the springboard for Season 2, and let's have it be one of the worst possible things that could happen. Let's talk about how young people can sometimes feel trapped in bad relationships because they aren't self-reliant enough to move on from them. We'll have Clementine meet a dog who she tries to bond with, but who ultimately attacks her, then have her meet an even more dysfunctional group than the last time. We're so close to having something good here, it's just, there's something missing in this game. Nick ponders, if only there were some way that we could have an old character come back. One who players would feel bad about having to abandon. One who had some sort of arc over the course of the first season. It's too bad that all the worthwhile characters are dead. So I guess that means we just have to make... Step 3, use Monster Reborn on Kenny. In the first game, Kenny's love for his family was the principal factor that guided his every action. It was, in a very real sense, his single purpose in life. However, his son eventually dies and his wife kills herself, leaving Kenny all alone. Now you see, Nick is a clever chap who knows his mythology. He knows that missing eyes have had a complex symbolic meaning in works of literature and folklore forever. While one might assume that a missing eye represents blindness, stories like the myth of Odin and plays like Oedipus Rex usually use missing eyes in a sort of ironic way, implying that knowledge of some sort has been acquired. So assuming The Walking Dead 2 is following suit, what does Kenny know? What truth has come to shape his very existence? Well, Nick tells you. And he tells you that this realization will be the second most disturbing part of this game. It's the realization that Kenny has gone mad because he sees the truth. He sees that he will never have a regular family ever again. Kenny will always remember them. After all, Kenny remembers everything. So now, you as part of this creative team are stunned at this ambitious choice to have such a dark take on a fan favorite from the last game, but you're haunted by Nick's words. You say, Nick, what do you mean that Kenny's existential dread will only be the second darkest element of this game? What's the first? And so Nick smiles his manic grin, for within the game he intends to hide a dark detail that can and should shape one's entire understanding of this game. Guys, Kenny is the dog that you kill at the beginning of the game. Step 4, make Kenny the mad dog. Okay, so that dog that Clem meets at the start of the game, the one that is lovable and could offer her some sort of companionship, well yeah, here's what we're gonna do. We're gonna make sure that the dog isn't compatible with the world around it, and it becomes violent and senseless, and offers more harm to Clem than good. And so, like the dog who is starved for sustenance, Kenny is starved for the warmth of his family. And like the dog who bites the hand that feeds him, Kenny's own desires to achieve his goals are gonna interfere with the very thing that he's trying to attain. At the end of the day, we will present Clem with the ultimate choice. We must give her the ability to put down Kenny for good. Hate to break the fourth wall here, but I have to get this off my chest. Innuendo Studios made a video where he posits that the second season of The Walking Dead is ultimately about an abusive relationship. But as someone who has first-hand experience with the subject in question, I have to say that I strongly disagree with this point. Kenny doesn't have the power over you that an abuser has. Your identity doesn't seem as contingent upon his presence in your life, and he isn't emotionally manipulative enough to fit the bill. No, The Walking Dead Season 2 is instead more interested in the idea of leaving the past behind, particularly moving away from the people who are just generally bad for you. Kenny is a character who's trapped in the past, so much so that you have heartbreaking moments like these pop up.
Pass me that can, Duck.
Here he accidentally calls Clem by the name of his dead son, Duck. What is perhaps most disturbing is that, unlike the end of the last game where the final choice that you make offers almost no change in the narrative theming of the game, the choice that you make at the end of The Walking Dead Season 2 ultimately shapes the way that one is to read Clementine's narrative arc. Should you choose to kill Kenny, the story becomes the tragic tale of a young girl who's forced to move on from an old relationship by killing the very man who she once called a friend. But the second ending is far more sinister. It tells the story of a man who is unable to move on from the past, his actions contaminated by his inability to just see what's in front of him, So much so that his decisions are ultimately detrimental to himself and those around him. And the most disturbing part about the second choice, to let Kenny live, is that should you choose to do so, you are essentially dooming Clementine to the same fate. Unable to move from the past, you as the player let him kill an innocent woman, watching the mad dog of a man butcher her with a rusty knife. This is the strength of The Walking Dead Season 2. This is why it's moving. Step 5. Profit. So that's the plan, says Brecton, and with this vision in mind, you all get to work. After months and months of development, the game is released to high praise, though not as high as the first. The hero of the day, Nick Brecton, managed to create something that will go down in gaming history as one of the most ambitious narratively driven sequels of all time, and it's unfortunately rather underappreciated to this very day. The Scattershot team at Telltale was held together by their passion for the characters and the world that they created, and that alone was the carrying force behind the success of the game. Despite their insane time constraints, borderline abusive working conditions, and minimal resources, the team managed to pull through on ambition alone, just hoping that their passion project could be just as good as the predecessor that came before it. I can almost imagine how happy the staff must have been, knowing that they had managed the impossible, creating a truly worthwhile sequel to one of the best narrative-driven games of all time. Little did they know that in a few years' time, they would all be sacked from Telltale Games, while creating the conclusion to the very franchise that they helped to elevate. Continued in Part 3.